Hello, and welcome to the Critical Move Hotel Sur. While increasing complaints of acts of cyberwar from the U.S. to other nations, with clearly political purposes, the current U.S. administration is set in the plane of victimization. It complains that the real spy through social media is the Chinese Communist Party. In what context does this accusation of the current tenant of the White House and his followers arise? What is the purpose? What are the geopolitical implications? Let's deploy the board. It starts the first move. President Donald Trump announced that he was considering banning the TikTok application, which belongs to the Chinese ByteDance group and has almost 1 billion users worldwide. His statements come in the context of the statement by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who said the U.S. was considering banning social media applications from China, on suspicion that the Chinese Communist Party is using them to spy on users. Let's review these and other statements. The TikTok thing, I want to put it in a wider context. We are committed to constant evaluation to ensure that we are protecting the privacy of American citizens and their flow of information. Therefore, this does not relate to any particular company, but rather to American national security. The comments I made about one particular company earlier this week are in the context of our assessment of the threat from the Chinese Communist Party. The comments of politicians made unilaterally by the U.S. are the maliciously discredit China and are totally unfounded. The Chinese government always requires our country's companies to cooperate with other countries in accordance with their laws and regulations. According to the logic of the U.S., the country has a lot of social media with a considerable number of users around the world. Does that represent a threat to the security of other countries in the world? The issue should be subject to monitoring and evaluation by the international community. We urge the U.S. to act with a correct mindset, to abandon prejudice, to stop judging others on the apps of their own standards, to stop using state power to surprise Chinese companies, and to promote economic and trade cooperation with China. Since the end of this year, telecommunication providers shall not purchase any 5G Huawei equipment, and once the telecommunication security law is approved, it will be legal for them to do so. Without any concrete evidence, the UK took the unfounded risks as an excuse and cooperated with the US to discriminate, suppress, and exclude Chinese companies. The UK blatantly violated market economic principles and free trade rules and renegade on its promises. This misguided decision seriously damages the interest of Chinese companies and affects the basis of mutual trust and Sino-British cooperation. China is firmly opposed to this. China is seriously concerned and reminds all of its companies to give importance to the increasing political security risks facing their businesses in the UK. China will fully and seriously assess the incident and take all necessary measures to safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of its companies. The United States brags about having strong values, but why is it so afraid of social media, where young people gladly share entertainment videos? Why does the U.S., if it claims to be strong, show itself so fragile? I think it's worth reflecting on this question. Let's update more information with our correspondent Jorge Stoso from Washington, D.C. Greetings, Jorge. Thank you so much. While Secretary Mike Pompeo claims that the TikTok application should be banned, since users in the U.S., in his own words, and I quote, "they are putting their private information in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party." President Donald Trump is evaluating the possibility of banning TikTok under another premise, to punish China for handling the coronavirus. The president said, and I quote, "TikTok is big business, a big business. Look what happened in China with this virus. What they have done to our country and to the whole world is a disgrace. And that's why he wants to eliminate the possibility of users in the United States being able to download the TikTok application. On the other hand, what has to do with the Army and Navy have already given the order to their officials who want to download the TikTok application on their phones, which is absolutely forbidden. Back to you. Thank you so much. Let's move on, and I invite you to check some digital information. TW on July 14, the United Kingdom excludes Huawei from the development of its 5G network. In a statement to the House of Commons, the Minister of Culture, Digital Sports and Media, Oliver Dowden, said all infrastructure provided so far by the Huawei will be removed from British territory by 2027. Dowden reported the measure after a meeting of the National Security Council, made up of some ministers and the state's attorney, and chaired by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, which overturned another January decision authorizing Huawei to access non-strategic parts of the 5G network, considering it to pose a manageable risk to national security. The minister explained that circumstances have changed and the Council has taken into consideration the decision announced in May by the U.S., immersed in a trade war with China, to restrict the sale of U.S.-made chips to the Asian giant, which put the supply chain at risk. Sanctions by the world's leading power limit Huawei's ability to produce important products, creating uncertainty around the supply chain, and the UK, the conservative politician said. Dowden admitted that the exclusion of the Chinese company will slow down the development of the high-speed network in this country by 2 to 3 years and increase the cost by about £2 billion, 2.2 billion euros. In recent days, major UK operators, including Vodafone and BT, have already warned that removing Huawei's equipment from UK networks will cost billions of pounds and may lead to signal cuts. The management of these companies say that to avoid major economic and service disruption, they will need at least 5 years to undertake the process of total removal. The British government has made the decision after receiving constant pressure from the United States, which maintains that the deals with Huawei expose countries to espionage and sabotage by the Chinese state, which Beijing denies. Let's go to Telesur. On July 15, China will sanction entities related to the autonomy law. The Asian country is determined to counter the interference of external forces in Hong Kong's affairs. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs reported that the country plans to impose sanctions against U.S. citizens and entities involved in the Hong Kong Home Rule Act signed by President Trump. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry condemned the signing of the act, which maliciously denigrates Hong Kong's national security law, contains threats to impose sanctions against China, seriously violates international law and fundamental principles of international relations, and is a gross interference in China's internal affairs. They also said any countermeasures taken will be necessary to protect its own legitimate interests. They stressed that the U.S. plans to prevent the implementation of the Hong Kong national security law will never succeed. The Chinese Foreign Ministry stressed that Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China. Hong Kong's affairs are only internal affairs of China, and no foreign state has the right to interfere.
De Relaciones Exteriores del gigante asiático.
There is a law in the U.S. that regulates the use of virtual platforms and especially social media. In the middle of the election year, President Donald Trump proposed to amend some of these laws. Let's see how they benefit him. On May 28th, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, signed an executive order ordering his cabinet to study ways to modify Article 230 of the Federal Telecommunications Law a rule that exempts technological platforms such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, among others, from responsibility for the content published by their users. The measure comes in the context of protests against racism and police violence following the murder of George Floyd, an African American who was killed by a policeman in Minneapolis. To this wave of social reputation, the president responded with a curfew and the deployment of the National Guard, in addition to authorizing via his Twitter account the uniform to shoot at the protesters. The company concealed the threat from the U.S. head of state for failing to comply with the rules regarding incitement to violence. In addition, he announced on the same platform an alleged electoral fraud against him in the state of California. As part of the implementation of the fact-checking policy to avoid the propagation of false news, Twitter called the message from the president potentially misleading information about the voting process. Trump would be, with the signing of this executive order, the first president of the United States to modify Article 230 of the Law of Communication, approved in 1996 by Bill Clinton. According to Section 230 of this law, social media are generally not responsible for the content posted by their users, but may proceed with so-called Good Samaritan blocking, as well as removing obscene, harassing, or violent material. Trump's order authorizes regulators to assess whether media should be legally responsible for what their users publish. It also states that legal immunity does not apply if a social media edits content posted by users, that is, if text or photos are removed for reasons other than those described in the website's terms of service. The fact has generated debate in public opinion. From the Progressive Party, they assure that the measure aims to installate a political police of the networks to protect their discourse, denounced by various sectors as a promoter of hate and xenophobia. During his 2016 election campaign, Trump broke the paradigm by being the only candidate to invest $10 million in propaganda in the traditional media, a much smaller amount than the $27 million invested by his opponent Hillary Clinton. However, it generated so much content through Google platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Vines that if measured its social conversion, this would accumulate 1,200 years talking about the New York magnate. With implementation of the so-called Project Alamo, Donald Trump's team applied the big data technique to collect information and preferences of the citizens and flood with their propaganda. With this technique, they were able to gather 14 million undecided voters, mostly white population, despite with Barack Obama's management. In its curious then now, when social networks are adverse to him, the tenant of the White House wants to assert his executive power to regulate digital platforms. On repeated occasions, leaders of countries under siege by the United States have denounced the use of Internet formats as instruments of political infiltration to promote acts of social destabilization and therefore overthrow sovereign governments. I'd like to suggest you the reading of an article titled United States and China on a Collision Course, written by Ferrero Angel and published on digital site El Salto Diario on July 7. I select some of its paragraphs. Here we are again, waiting for the clash between the digital superpowers of the US and China. Shira Ovaid recently wrote in an article for the New York Times about the decision days ago of Facebook, Google, and Twitter to refuse to provide information on their users to the Hong Kong authorities when required. At this point, it would not be necessary to state the obvious, namely that Washington and Beijing are engaged in a trade war with far-reaching repercussions, if it were not for the multiplication, at least suspiciously, of articles about China in the Western press in recent months, with almost always negative coverage. The member of parliament for the left wing in the Bundestag, Sabine Dallin, is not far wrong when she compares the situation in an opinion article for the German daily John Watt with the crisis in the Crimea in 2014, when the United States and the European Union initially approved individual sanctions, which were later transformed into economic and financial sanctions. The media construction of China as an adversary is similarly underway. In the case of China, we are currently seeing a similar strategy from the US, which is pushing for the EU as well as the Pacific allied states through military agreements, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand to participate in it. The policy of stinging seeks rather to stop the country's political and economic rise from a former Western colonial subject to an equal player, or at least to delay it. By insisting and occupying as much media space as possible, this news coverage may succeed in reversing this trend in public opinion, but the consequences may go beyond what its authors consciously or unconsciously wish. What makes this anti-China campaign so dangerous is that it is at the confluence of many powerful nationalist and imperialist elements in our society, including our privatized security apparatus, warned U.S. journalist Marshall Levin in May. And all it can lead to is more empire, more racism and intolerance, and worse politics. It is well known that Trump favors what is known as brinkmanship, the tactic of taking negotiations to an extreme of apparent non-return. However, alongside the trade wars, there is still political and in some cases financial support for the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong or the World Uyghur Congress, which the Western press invariably presents with a more friendly face. And Brussels, in the struggle between the US and China, it is often said that Europe is in the middle, but from the European capital, some people, in confidence, confess that they are rather tempted to say that it is nowhere to be found. This article is more extensive. Consult it. Let's take our first break in a critical move. Remember, there is a strategic move in social media for you to participate with us. While the United States launches its cyber war against countries that are inconvenient, Donald Trump tries to censor social media and stop the expansion of 5G Huawei, considering it a spy at the service of China. What does really worry him? Leave your opinion. Let's take a short break. The US-China confrontation has intensified and reaches bases beyond the commercial one. Let's review the context. Between sanctions, imposition of trade tariffs applied on the import, export, or transit of goods, the Trump administration maintains a hegemonic dispute with China in order to dominate the market on the basis of protectionism. From the beginning of his election campaign, he decided to attack the Asian giant as his main political enemy. That is why behind the commercial war against China, it had emerged other battles, such as the technological war for the control of information. The growth of Chinese industries, such as Huawei, has been interpreted by the United United States and its Western allies as a threat that would allegedly jeopardize the security of these nations, particularly through fifth-generation or 5G technology. Consequently, the U.S. government has launched a global campaign against Huawei to prevent its international partners from having preferential recourse to this technological giant. But the competition between the two powers goes beyond that. After the United States and Russia, China is the third country in the world to complete a mission into outer space, something Washington is not content with. The Asian giant has sent 6 crews into space and launched 2 laboratories into Earth's orbit. In January 2019, its National Space Administration achieved a milestone never before reached by man to install an unmanned spacecraft, the Change E4 probe, located on the dark side of the moon. Meanwhile, the United States persists in positioning itself beyond the Earth, primarily to protect its assets, which include satellites used for communication and surveillance purposes. Early this year, Washington issued the National Defense Authorization Act 2020 Space Force, which contains the first Air Force Space Command, considering that space is the new domain of war in the world, according to the document. The renewed space race encompasses the control of security and satellites, as well as the search for and obtaining natural resources, such as water and helium gas-free energy sources for nuclear fusion. We start the analysis. We have from the United States Mariano Muñoz, he's an activist, and from Puerto Rico, Dr. Carlos Ernesto Severino Valdez, Professor of Political Geography. Welcome both of you. Mariano, I will start with you. In the midst of the electoral year, we can see that not only is getting worse the campaign anti-China from Trump's administration based on this commercial war, but also this anti-China campaign goal extends to the social media area. It's a little bit funny that they are accusing anyone of cyber espionage. All the big corporations on social media, yes, they are at the service of this country, such as Facebook, Twitter, and others. When the White House accuses other international corporations, and in this case, Huawei, of espionage, it's a little bit sarcastic because it's known that it's a populist tactic of President Trump. Because people who vote for him, well, they don't read, and they don't know what's going on. They only read the titles. And they see the president's declaration and statements, and they say, well, he is protecting us against those Chinese people who are the new enemy in this moment. And in this year of campaign, we are going to see more of this. And England has decided to go against it and to deny the Huawei products. It goes alongside with what is going on here. And we'll see more of this in coming months. Of course, but in these months, which are very important because the poll says that Donald Trump is not in the same position against his opponent, Joe Biden, in the context of protests and manifestation anti-racists and against violence of police. And these executive statements of Trump of forbid not only TikTok but also regulate social media in the United States. They've been doing this for a long time. It is known that Facebook, Google, and Twitter, most of all Google and Facebook, they are instruments of the government, and they are used for information. And in this moment, any information of any people who are organizing, we know that they are being used in these campaigns. However, it is only known that Trump's threats, they don't reach too much. They are only threats to obtain more votes And people just get along with the declarations and statements. They don't have the capacity to make deep research. And many of these threats, well, they won't reach. And I wouldn't be surprised at all that there are some businesses inside of all of these corporations, including Trump, with China and Russia. What he says and what he does are two completely different things. Programs and softwares designed to identify and to gather these organizers, civilian, ordinary people who are being organized lately with the recent wave of rebellions generated by African people. And behind these programs, it's only a computer that is programmed, and it started gathering the people who are active on social media. And then we see the FBI, the CIA, and people based on that. But they take action. It is very dangerous to attend that a simple robot take care of this sort of intelligence work, which is illegal. But those are work of intelligence, and I'm going to reflect with Dr. Carlos about this. Those work of intelligence, based on the United States, is accusing China, and he is the one who is undertaking it on its own territory against its own connationals. Doctor, we hear you.
Sí, gracias.
Yes, thank you. Greetings.
De verdad que lo que estamos viviendo,
The truth is, what we are living as a result of this commercial war, which is another hegemonic scenario of confrontation that comes out from accepting that the world is not a unipolar world as it was planned, but it is a multipolar world, which is causing all of these disputes. As Mariano was saying before, I think it is very, very interesting. As Fidel Castro said once, and we can see in a recent movie that it's streaming right now, it's playing on streaming, the Avispa network, that it is about 5 Cubans imprisoned and trapped in terrorist networks that emerged in Miami, in Florida, against Cuba. In that occasion, Fidel Castro said, it's very curious that the most spying country accuses of espionage to the most spied upon country. And on this sense, it's something very contradictory that a country that has taken the espionage on a more extravagant way that you can imagine, and today is accusing other countries. And so I think that in all of these sorts of struggles, what we concern today is this commercial war, especially the cybernetic issue, which is a new scenario among other multiples in this confrontation moments, so that the United States has to accept at the end that the world is not as it was drawn after the fall of the Soviet Union, where it was thought by all ideologies and neoliberalism that we were moving on to a completely unipolar world. But it has been proved that it's not like that. And that has caused a reaction in different areas, some sort of violence against this reality. And there are a lot of people that cannot comprehend how the nation that during 40 years was the most favorable by the commerce and protected by the United States well,
en tantos indicadores
it had
económicos
left it behind in
importantes.
so
Hoy en
many,
día es
so
el
many factors
principal país exportador
as the
del
main
mundo y el
exporting
principal país
country in the
importador,
world,
y en muchos renglones,
and
como
in
dije, pues
many
aventaja a los
other
Estados Unidos.
parts
Y
that
basta simplemente pensar
it's only
que
necessary
el
to
país
think
que había sido y sigue siendo un país
that the
poderoso, hoy en
country
día
was and
luce un
still is a
país
very powerful country,
languidecido. Los
and today
Estados
looks
Unidos se
a
sabe
little
que
bit
tienen un
weakened,
déficit trillonario
that
en
has
infraestructura. Los
as
rieles de los
big
trenes
losses of
atrasados, las calles,
infrastructures,
puentes. El propio
bridges,
presidente Trump
trails,
habló de eso,
trains.
mientras China es un país
President
que
spoke
expresa un
about it,
vigor.
while China is a country
Dice que
that
esto
has a courage.
causa una frustración enorme. Bueno, se
It
equivocaron en
reflects
sus
a
cálculos
huge
y no
frustration
pudieron
because
ver
they
lo que se
didn't
imponía.
see
Se
what was
imponía un
imposing
país que supo
in a
mover sus
country
fichas y
that
hoy en día se ha
knew
convertido en
how
una
to
sólida
make a move
potencia
and
a
became a
nivel
solid
mundial, que como se
power
decía también en la
worldwide.
introducción
As I was
a este
saying at
segmento,
first,
pues pone en órbita satélites,
that
hace
put satellites on
aterrizajes
orbit,
o amarizajes importantes en otras
an
partes del
important
espacio exterior,
an important
y
part
que ha
of
logrado también
the
un
airspace,
milagro que se
and have
pensaba
achieved a
imposible:
miracle that they
sacar
thought it was
a
impossible,
millones de personas
and it
de la
was to
pobreza. Es
take
el país que más
millions of people out
personas
of
jamás haya
poverty. It's
sacado
the
personas de la
country that
pobreza para
has taken
llevarlos a
out
una
of
clase media
poverty the
que
most
pone,
people.
¿verdad? Pone entre juego a lo que está pasando en el mundo.
And
Y
it
los
really shows
aliados de los
what's going
Estados
on in the
Unidos
world.
precisamente
US allies,
saben que
they
en
know
este contexto esta
that in
guerra
this
comercial
context
no lleva a ningún sitio, pues porque restringe
doesn't lead
sus
anywhere
mercados de
because
exportación, y los mercados de exportación de la
the
mayor parte de los países
exportation
europeos, la
markets,
exportación de materia,
as
perdón,
mostly
de
in the
productos
European countries,
manufacturados importantes como vehículos
it's
y otro tipo de
important,
cosas, pues
such as
no
vehicles
hay
and other
ningún
stuff.
productor
Well, there
importante,
is
ningún fabricante
any
importante que no
producer,
tenga
important
visto
producer
hoy
that
el
has
mercado
not
chino
ready
como
the
objetivo. Y
Chinese
ciertamente, pues
market,
toda esta guerra comercial lo que hace
just because of all of this
es
commercial
una
war,
situación
which is a
que
situation
no
that
le conviene realmente a nadie.
it's not good for
Ese sentido,
anyone,
pues,
and in the sense,
funciona de esta manera.
and it works
Y
this way.
presumiblemente a quien menos le conviene es a la
And
administración Trump. Yo
in fact,
quiero
it's Trump's
circunscribirme
administration the one who
nuevamente al tema electoral,
doesn't benefit the most
reflexionando
with it.
unos minutos más con Mariano.
I'd like to reflect a little more
Para
minutes with Mariano.
preguntarte,
I'd like to
Mariano,
ask you,
partiendo de
Mariano,
algo que
starting
planteabas al
for something
principio
that you
de
were
esta
saying
entrevista, y tiene que
at
ver con las
the beginning of this
ironías, ¿no?,
interview, and it
de
has to
esta
do with the
política
irony
del presidente
of this
Trump. Ironías
policies of
también
President Trump.
porque si nos
Ironies
remontamos a la campaña de
because if
2016
we
y lo veíamos
go
en
all the
uno
way
de nuestros
back to the
materiales,
campaign of
se dice que el
2016,
presidente Trump invirtió más dinero
it is said that
en
President
hacer
Trump
campaña
invested
mediante
more
redes
money
sociales que por vía
by doing
tradicional, o sea,
campaigns
por los
through
medios
social
de
media that
comunicación tradicionales.
on traditional media
En
such
cambio,
as
su
television,
contrincante Hillary Clinton,
and
digamos
and his
que lo
opponent Hillary
aventajó en
Clinton
ese terreno.
took advantage in
Ahora
that field.
intenta el hoy presidente Trump,
And
pero también
today,
candidato a la
our
reelección,
current president
vetar,
Donald Trump is trying
frenar
to
a
slow
estas
down,
redes
is trying to
sociales. Te
stop
pregunto por qué.
the social media, and I ask you why.
Está de moda, ¿no? O sea, Trump es un populista
I think
que
it's something that is on
intenta
style.
una ¿no? El truco de Trump es vender, ¿no? Es vender, ¿no?
The
Aparte
thing
de
about
la-
Trump is to sell. So, especially today, because of all the things that are going on because of the quarantine, a lot of people who vote for him, they have untrusted bases, and they are very careful by staying online. And I've seen that he's using that to his favor. In 2016, one of the things that is good to make clear that it was good for clear that he did himself, it was that he went himself to many parts of the country in person, and that was something good for him back in that campaign. Now he's changing that strategy because now in this virtual world, people who vote for him, they don't want that. People are afraid to stay online, and that is why Trump is doing to play with the sensations, feelings, and the minds of people. So he's going to want to control as much as he can the political center of the world. As any politician in the world, he says one thing on one side, then he says another thing on the other side. Twitter is a media that is a little bit more democratic in the sense with the Democratic Party, which is doing everything and is going to do so much more against Trump to be able to overthrow him. Facebook step aside a little bit, but they are going to stay. They are corporations that know how to handle the policy of the United States in this way. So no matter who is in power, they're never going to want to call it the relationship. So what we are watching these days is that the influence of the 5G, it's already been lived. It's already been lived. And as the doctor from Puerto Rico was saying earlier, the reasons why this country has stopped producing, for instance, the chips and softwares, because they sold the jobs, they sold the industries in the last 30 years have recovered. Well, myself speaking as an American citizen, we depend on all of these chips and all of these Microsoft, all of these softwares, because we do it in this country, and it takes a lot of time. And in China, it seems that it's also we are at their mercy with the chips that China sent over, which are very important for this sort of virtual world that we have today. And those same chips from the Chinese government, Huawei, they are making registry and intelligence apparatus, and obviously the people are the ones who lose. And the American people here, Chinese are at the mercy of the security and the whole control of their own governments. And the Chinese government is doing against its own citizens, against the freedom of expression. And what's going here is that people here are hypocrites. They say that there is freedom, they say that there is freedom of expression, that we are all free, but all we know that there are laws and there is a total control and against through all social media that works with the government. And China, at least they didn't say it, they're not hypocrites. They say it's just the way it is. No, they don't say, no, we're going to blockade you. No, we're not. It's the same thing. They are hypocrites in the U.S. government and the U.S. population. They don't have the time to investigate by themselves if it's true. Especially that last thing that you just said, taking into account how the information is processed when the United States of America gets it. And we totally understand your position as a resident in the United States. Thank you so much. And we also thank the doctor for your time for our critical move today. See you soon, both of you. Let's take another break in our critical move. Remember, there is a strategic move in social media. While the United States launches its cyber war against countries that are inconvenient, Donald Trump tries to censor social media and stop the expansion of 5G Huawei, considering it a spy at the service of China. What does really worry him? Here the question is, what does really worry the U.S. of Donald Trump? Stay with us. Now, before the break, what if we place on the geopolitical map these two powers that are leading the race for world leadership? Let's see.
Estados Unidos y China.
United States
¿Cuál
and
es la
China.
primera potencia
What is the
mundial?
world's leading power?
Estados Unidos y
The
China
United States and
enfrentan una
China are
disputa
facing
no
a
solo
dispute,
comercial,
not only
sino
commercial,
también
but also
geopolítica,
geopolitical,
con el objetivo de
with the aim of
consagrarse como
establishing
primera
themselves
potencia
as the
mundial.
world's leading power.
La nación norteamericana
The
se
American
ubica entre
nation
los
is located
océanos
between the
Pacífico y
Pacific and
Atlántico.
Atlantic Oceans.
Limita al norte
It is
con
bordered
Canadá,
to the north by
al sur
Canada,
con México,
to south by
y a través
Mexico,
de Alaska
and through
tiene
Alaska
acceso
has
directo
direct
al
access
Círculo
to the
Polar
Arctic
Ártico.
Circle.
Cuenta con una
It
superficie
has an
de
area of
9,83
9.83
millones
million
de
square
kilómetros
kilometers.
cuadrados, sin contar
Nat
los
County is
territorios no incorporados que
unincorporated
poseen el Mar
territories in the
Caribe y el
Caribbean Sea
Pacífico
and the
en
Pacific
calidad de
as
colonias.
colonies.
Su capital
Its capital is Washington, District of Columbia, or Washington, D.C., and its most populated and cosmopolitan city, New York. The United States has arguably the largest national economy in the world, in nominal terms, with an estimated 15.7 trillion in GDP, equivalent to 1/4 of global GDP. But in terms of purchasing power parity, its GDP is the second largest on the planet, behind China. The country is the main capitalist force in the world. It has been one of the leaders in scientific research and technological innovation since the 19th century, in addition to being the main industrial power. The U.S. is the world's third largest oil producer and the largest importer of this product, the main reason for its imperialist policy. It is also one of the leading producers of electric and nuclear energy, liquefied natural gas, sulfur, phosphates, and salt. In parallel, the People's Republic of China, located in Central Asia with an area of 9,596,960 square kilometers, is the third largest country on the planet after Russia and Canada. It borders 14 states, Vietnam, Laos, and Burma in the southeast, India, Bhutan, Nepal, and Pakistan in the south, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan in Central Asia, Russia, Mongolia, and North Korea in East Asia. In addition, it shares maritime borders with South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and the Philippines. China is a power that controls a vast coastline from the Sea of Japan in the northwest to the Gulf of Tonkin in the south. Its coasts are bathed by two strategic seas, the East China Sea and the South China Sea. Agriculture is of vital importance to the national economy. China has a great deal of mineral resources. Iron reserves are estimated at 40 billion tons. Its refined tin production accounts for 80% of the world's. It has other like magnetite, molybdenum, mercury, manganese, lead, zinc, copper, and uranium. Since 1996, it has topped the world's list of steel, coal, cement, fertilizer, and television production. It's the third largest producer of cars after the United States and Japan. China is the first world consumer of energy and the first producer of solar panels and wind turbines. It is a nuclear power and has the first merchant marine on the planet. The Beijing government is investing millions in development projects in countries rich in raw materials and creating alliances where everyone wins. Because of this, it has become a kind of an alternative world bank, as it has a huge amount of foreign currency. Both China and the United States are, along with Russia, the United Kingdom, and France, permanent members of the United Nations Security Council with veto power.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on Telesur.
We're back. Let's review other examples that illustrate how the ruthless war waged by Western hegemonies from cyberspace has been gaining ground for purely political purposes. As a geopolitical tool, cyberspace has long been a combative arena. Its importance is growing rapidly as new information and communication technologies are developed. The hegemonic powers base their unconventional warfare on the use of the internet and social media, using state-of-the-art technologies. Cyber attacks are here one of the main weapons. In 2012, Anonymous pointed out that since then, the First World Computer War was already underway. In 2017, the cyber war demonstrated its capacity for destruction. That year, cybernetic attacks paralyzed the airport of Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, and caused stoppages in the lines of public transport, as well as affecting the Russian media. It also has been the cause of intentional spills in oil facilities, sabotage to power or hydroelectric plants, such as those suffered in Venezuela in early 2019, and orchestrated from the U.S., which affected 80% of the population, that is, 18 of the country's 23 states, in addition to attacks on gas plants in other nations. Cyberspace has also been used as a theater of operations to influence election results, attack stock markets, and public figures through network blackmail. An example of the use of technology in favor of political interests was provided by the data processing company Cambridge Analytica, involved in the biggest privacy scandal that Facebook has ever suffered, by exposing the information of millions of users to be later acquired by the British political consultancy. The company was accused of misusing personal information for the benefit of its political clients. In the context of the U.S. commercial war against China, the White House has accused the Asian giant of cyber espionage, which Beijing has denounced as unfounded accusations. In this line, Washington accuses without proof the Chinese Huawei company of espionage and cyber spying for allegedly using its 5G infrastructure and technologies to gain access to industrial secrets. We continue the analysis with Iñaki Gil de San Vicente from San Sebastian. Welcome to our critical move. There are three matters, if the time allows me to analyze. The first of them, social media, which back in that moment were friends of President Trump, or back then candidate to presidency. Well, now they seem to be his enemies when he is candidate to re-elections. How do you understand that? I think there are basically two ways. One of the is the way of what the Democratic Party has learned, that during 4 years maintain a classic and normal campaign, using the television, radio, written press, etc. And they didn't use quite much the social media, while Donald Trump barely used the usual media. So he turned directly to the social media. And it came from the proper difference of the economical context of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump is a businessman who is used to cheat and to manipulate and to make promises and to take things to extreme limit, because he was involved in the most broad world in the policy, in the world of tourism, pageants, etc. And so inside this world he completely dominated, and he realized that using the social media could benefit him. And in the second case, I like to give an example. It was a terrible defeat of Nixon by Kennedy, basically by the change of political propaganda systems that Robert Kennedy brought in. He realized that television was going to change the use of political propaganda, And on a television debate, they appear with a bad image, with no sympathy at all, with weird looks that since the 60s those are forbidden at any TV show, at any program, because they negatively affect the visual language, the body languages, the mimic, etc. And perfectly this new media, the television media, and many investigators realized that back in that debate, everything changed in the politics. Well, exactly the same thing has happened with the use of social media. Kennedy realized that. When he realized that, he thought that it was going to win the elections. With Donald Trump, something has happened despite the support in the world's U.S. economy. His staff realized that mechanism has changed. What has happened? There have been two factors. First one, democratic. They have seen that the panorama during these 4 years have changed in the American society. They have seen that it has been an increase, a recent increase of situation that came from a long time before. The resistance of indigenous people and the U.S. polity, the sinking of the industry, the U.S. debt, and the proper statements of Donald Trump, among others, a lot of stuff, and a radicalization of a wide sector of left wing inside the Democratic Party. And inside of these changes, as we enter into the second matter that I like to reflect on, this has to do with how it's been concentrated this aggression against China now in the social media area as well. Well, precisely, it's because also Democrats and Republicans, also Americans as British, as Indians are Australians and other powers that they don't say, but they are inside the same bloc. They have taken a policy for a long time now. Let's say that the main objective is use Russia as a military objective, something against Russia and China. So the immediate of these elections has increased this situation. But sooner or later, it has to take the form because of the new information and technologies of communication, the new social media, the new artificial intelligence, etc. Anyone who has a study on the history of the conflicts among big powers can realize that it's a necessary struggle against that two powers, one that increases and the other one that decreases. As well as on the Roman Empire, when the production of papyrus, the states they could not have papyrus to produce the paper, etc. So the production of papyrus in Egypt, so that basically it was like some sort of the beginning of imperial blockades in the history of mankind. How do you see this politic of the Chinese government? I would say with no precedents, we need it, if we could say it in some way, to answer against the so-called sanctions of the United States. If we see from an immediate perspective, since like today, right now, it's a clear polity. If we see as a nation that has suffered a permanent Western attack, the experience and the politics and the Chinese national sentiment is a sentiment that has been formed. It's different from the American or from the British. It has been formed by a profound resistance to resist collectively to any attack that can come from West. The American culture has been always a culture that from that moment when they have to face the British and to expel them. Only with the 11, the Americans understood what was to be being attacked. But only with the 11 they understood that. And the same thing happened with the British, but in China didn't happen like that. Since the Opium War, during the whole 19th century and by the end of the 18th century, until the victory of the Communist Revolution in the year 49, China has been desired for foreign powers, and at the same time, the method of which China has won the Opium War, they were the same Opium War that killed millions of Chinese people, 20% as minimum. During the two Opium Wars, some sort of sleeping. And the people who were able to direct the Chinese has a defensive violence that totally current with the commercial violence, geopolitical as well as military, and it's a struggle that it's also an art violence. It's a defensive violence, pacific and economical and commercial that have taken place right now in China. We have to understand that it's a history of any people. Therefore, China answers because it's conscious that the West always have wanted China as an object to destroy. Napoleon said, when China wakes up, the world will tremble. The world will shake. And if we study the history of China, we would see that it's like that. And maybe for that reason, maybe the world, and most of all the West world, is shaking against this growth of China. We don't have much time. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you. Till next time. Let's go to conclusions. With unfounded comments based on assumptions, no evidence in hand. This is how the U.S. administration proceeds when blaming China for spying. Yes, spying, something the U.S. is quite an expert at. Just mention the recent NSA scandals and the historic ones involving the CIA. Are the U.S. and its Western allies really victims of espionage? Is the national security of the world's police in danger? Why does it undertake these actions that could well translate into dictatorial censorship in the middle of an election year in the U.S.? Time will tell us the real truth. For today, we close the geopolitical board.